I really can't believe it's been 30 years since we've been doing Chi Alpha at VCU. I remember these 4 young freshmen, young ladies in Rhodes Hall that we started that Bible study with. But one of those students, she had a boyfriend back home who she told us did not know Christ, had not received him. And so we prayed for him all of the time. And I remember about a year in, he came out and came to one of our socials. And I noticed that he was a little bit off to the side and hanging out. And so I had the joy of going and sitting and just getting to know him and really trying to give him space to share about his life and how much we care for him. And he actually began to open up. I realized he really thought maybe if he walked through the doors, he would, we'd shove the Bible down his throat or something like that, but that we would relationally give him opportunity to share. And it was a wonderful conversation that he and I had. I still can remember sitting there together. And what happened in the subsequent weeks is one of our team members began to meet with him as he began to ask questions. And we found out he really was exploring what it means to follow Jesus. And he didn't want to do that just because his girlfriend was a follower of Jesus. He received Christ and began to be discipled. That really stands out to me because that's the DNA of Chi Alpha. It is finding people that are away from God, who might kind of be sitting to the edges and they just want space to be in conversation with someone and then to be introduced to Jesus and then discipled.
It started with a freshman named Abby. And I remember that she was in the nursing program, and the nursing program at VCU is so, it's difficult. It's really challenging, and so she was really wanting God to use her during these years that she was a student, but she was nervous about stepping into something like small group leadership because she knew it was going to require a lot of her, and she didn't know if she could do that and be successful in her nursing program. But she decided after a lot of prayer and talking, yes, she wanted to do it. And so one of the parts of that was that she decided that she wanted to overcome her anxiety around her academic program. And she was studying with a friend who was not a Christian named Kaylee. And they both were just talking about how much anxiety, this was kind of during the time when anxiety started coming up a lot as a mental health issue with students. And they both just acknowledged, man, so much anxiety around tests. And so they started, Abby said, what I do is I pray and it helps me to have a lot of peace. And so Kaylee was like, well, will you pray for both of us before the test? So they started doing that. And so this opened the door again for Abby to share with her about her faith. As they talked and spent time together, Abby shared and Kaylee was more and more open with her questions about Jesus. And over the summer then, Kaylee called Abby and she said, I bought this Bible, I don't understand it. She had bought a KJV Bible and didn't understand it. So Abby went ahead and bought her something that was a little easier to understand. And they started studying together. And that fall, Kaylee made a commitment to give her life to Jesus. What was really beautiful is that there were many other nursing students through Kaylee and Abby who just started either becoming curious about the Lord or renewing their faith. Several of them joined a small group, and Kaylee, of course, was growing in her faith. Abby got to baptize her as her small group leader, and we just saw several nursing students come to Christ during that time, and it was really cool.
I remember times during those years had such incredible worship at the Chi Alpha house. In fact, there was one year we had somewhat of a revival happening in the arts and music and putting all that together. And if you can imagine a floor of a house just completely filled with students, 50, 60 students in there, packed in, And in every room going around the floor, we had one room, artists painting as they were worshiping. Other room, there was dance happening. Another room, there was worship. The music was being led. And in every place, there were people on the floor for what was over an hour of worship every single week because they just couldn't get enough. It was an incredible season. One thing I love about campus ministry is the passion in the season of life that you catch students in those crossroads of decision and future, and where God is right in the middle of it. And I got to see that so often in Chi Alpha. I'll never, ever forget it. And so forever grateful to be a part of it.
So we had finished out a school year and we were kind of moving into the summer. And typically the summer times were kind of low key. You know, you had a weekly Bible study, not too big a deal. And so our first meeting was getting ready to start. And I happened to be upstairs in one of the bedrooms on the phone in the Chi Alpha house. And I told somebody else, hey, just go ahead and get the meeting started. And then he came upstairs. He's like, man, Alan, you got to come downstairs. You won't believe what's going on. And I go downstairs and there's like 15 people there. And half of them I didn't even know. So I wasn't sure what that summer was going to look like. So I went back home and said, gosh, you know, what do we do with these people? There's a lot of mature followers of Christ here. So Lord kind of led me to Isaiah 35. It's prophecy about the ransom being returned to Zion. And there's one scripture in there that says, in there, there'll be a highway, a way of holiness. And so that's what we decided to teach on that summer, was a highway of holiness. And figured out we had all these people, let's invest in them and get them back into their campuses. And then that Sunday, I was at Commonwealth Chapel, and the service was over, and I noticed a young man in the back, and he was sitting all by himself, and his head was down, and obviously kind of downcast. And so I approached him, and his name was Matt, and he was from one of the local charismatic churches in town. It turned out he had had a falling out with his pastor, and he wasn't leading worship there anymore. So I began to talk to him a little bit, told him about what we were doing during the summer, and just kind of, told him that it might be a good idea if he could participate in some way. I thought that would kind of reinvigorate his faith. And so he said, yeah, that'd be great, but I would kind of work. I wouldn't be able to be there at the beginning of the meetings. And I said, well, I think we can work that out. I think what we can do is we can swap the meeting, and we'll teach first, and then we'll do worship second. So the next week, we started out, we had like 25 people, even more people from other colleges. We did the teaching, and then Matt came in a little bit later and did worship. And because we didn't have to finish the meeting at a certain time and it was summertime, worship just tended to go on. We kind of wrapped everything up. I was talking to Matt afterwards, kind of debriefing. And he said, hey, I want you to know something. I said, what? He said, well, I've reconciled with my pastor, and I'm back leading worship again. And so that was just a really neat thing to see God do that. You know, throughout that summer, he was unpredictable, didn't know what was coming. He was gathering worshipers to himself, and here he was reconciling Matt back to himself and reconciling Matt to his lead pastor.
And the student ministry was really starting to grow, but hadn't really caught momentum. And we've been praying for two things. One, an evangelist, a galvanizer of students. And then two, we're praying for like a really funny person that was like marginally Christian, but that's whatever. We kept praying for this evangelist to come. And Grace was riding in our car. She was brand new. She didn't know us at all. But she comes to the retreat and ends up loving the retreat. Soon after that, within about 3 or 4 weeks, she had brought, I would say, 12 to 15 of her sorority sisters. And then those sisters started bringing some of their male friends. And all of a sudden, we had this huge, momentous thing that started happening. Some of those same students that came because of Grace helped start our church, Hill City. They were on staff or served in some different capacity with kids or graphic design. And her willingness to invite and be such a witness to her friends had these kids come to faith, and then they helped plant a church that's helped, impact thousands of people here in the Richmond area.
When I think about how UVA Chi Alpha and VCU Chi Alpha story got connected, I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with Rob Roden when a transition was coming, and I just sensed of the Spirit that God wanted to use our fellowship to be a part of the bridge until new leadership could come. And so we started asking questions, how could we partner with Chi Alpha at VCU? And then I remember having a conversation with Mike Godso in a hallway at a conference and just saying, he was sharing how he sensed a transition was coming, and I shared about the opportunity at VCU, and the Spirit just began to do something. And so it's just been such a joy to be just a small bridge between a great big story and see how the Lord brought the Godsos in the midst of that. And so that's how we got involved and how we ended up partnering with VCU Chi Alpha for a year and a half.
Right after COVID, we were trying to engage with the freshman class as they were starting to come back on campus, and to be honest, it was probably one of the smallest groups of students on campus. Like we always do, we were out on campus with a table trying to connect with students, and one hot August day, we just had popsicles out, and we were trying to connect with some folks who were passing by, and one guy came up and we introduced ourselves, told him about Chi Alpha. He said, "I'll take a popsicle," and he walks away. And I think, well, probably the last time I see him. But about 10 minutes later, he comes walking back by, tells me his name is Ethan, and Ethan asked a question. "Do you guys do Bible studies?" I'm like, "Yeah." So we sat down next to the table, and he told me that during COVID, he had gotten tired of the Netflix queue, browsing the internet, and he saw a Bible on his shelf, and he began to read through the Bible, starting in Matthew. And he said he got to the Sermon on the Mount, and he said, "I'm fascinated about Jesus. Can I talk to somebody about Jesus?" And I said, "You certainly can." A couple weeks later, he said, "Mike, I've decided to give my life to Jesus." He got baptized, and his life was changed. He graduated that year. He was a senior, and so we had the opportunity to buy this building around that same time. And he was so impacted by the ministry. Even though he was just having enough to make ends meet, he said, "You know what? I want to give $1,000 to that building." And so isn't it just like God, where one life is touched and that goes on to touch many, many more?